The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store in San Diego, California, and Katherine Zimmerman stepped down onto the dusty street, wearing little more than torn fabric and borrowed hope. The dress that had once been her mother's finest had been reduced to rags during the brutal journey west, stolen from twice, caught in a wagon wheel, and finally shredded by a desperate scramble through brambles when bandits had attacked their party near the Arizona border. She clutched what remained of her carpetbag, which now contained only a tarnished locket and a letter from Harrison O'Brien, the rancher who had agreed to marry her sight unseen. Katherine's cheeks burned with shame as townspeople stopped to stare at the spectacle she presented. Her auburn hair hung in tangled waves around her shoulders, freed from its pins days ago. The bodice of her dress gaped where buttons had torn away, and she held the fabric together with one trembling hand. Her shoes, once serviceable traveling boots, had holes worn through the soles, and her feet ached with every step. She had imagined arriving in California looking dignified and presentable, a woman of quality despite her recent misfortunes. Instead, she looked like a beggar, possibly worse. "Are you the mail-order bride?" a woman's voice called from across the street. The speaker was elderly, dressed in a crisp navy dress with a white collar, her gray hair pinned severely beneath a bonnet. Her expression held more curiosity than judgment, which gave Katherine a small measure of comfort. "I am Katherine Zimmerman," Katherine replied, lifting her chin despite her mortification. "I am meant to meet Harrison O'Brien. Do you know where I might find him?" The elderly woman crossed the street with surprising speed, her eyes taking in every detail of Katherine's appearance. "Lord have mercy, child. What happened to you?" "Harrison is at the general store collecting supplies. I am Mrs. Henderson, and I help run the boarding house. You poor thing." Before Katherine could respond, the door to the general store swung open, and a man stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that strained against his cotton work shirt. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and needed cutting, curling slightly at his collar. His face was weathered from years under the California sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. Those eyes, a startling blue-gray like storm clouds over the ocean, fixed on Katherine with an expression she could not quite read. "Katherine." His voice was deeper than she had imagined from his letters, with a gentle quality that seemed at odds with his imposing size. "Mr. O'Brien." She tried to curtsy, but her legs wobbled from exhaustion, and she stumbled forward instead. Harrison closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, catching her elbow to steady her. His hand was calloused and warm through the thin, torn fabric of her sleeve. Up close, she could see flecks of gold in his eyes and a small scar above his left eyebrow. He smelled of leather, soap, and something earthy she could not identify. "What happened?" The question came out rough, almost angry, but his touch remained gentle as he helped her stay upright. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had not cried through any of the disasters that had befallen her on the journey west, and she would not cry now, not in front of this man who was essentially a stranger, not in front of the growing crowd of curious onlookers. The journey was more difficult than anticipated. There were delays and bandits, and I lost my trunk in a river crossing near El Paso. These clothes are all I have left, and as you can see, they barely qualify as clothing anymore. Harrison's jaw tightened, and for a moment she feared he would change his mind about the arrangement. What man wanted a wife who arrived looking like she had been dragged behind a wagon? He had written that he wanted a respectable woman to help him build his ranch into something more, to create a home and eventually a family. She looked anything but respectable at this moment. But then his expression softened and he shrugged out of his coat, a sturdy brown duster that still held the warmth of his body. He draped it around her shoulders and it engulfed her, hanging nearly to her ankles. "Come with me," he said quietly. "I have something for you." He guided her toward a wagon hitched in front of the store, one hand hovering near her elbow as if afraid she might collapse. Mrs. Henderson followed, clucking her tongue in sympathy. Several other townspeople had gathered, their expressions ranging from pity to scandalized fascination. Katherine heard whispered conversations but could not make out the words. At the wagon, Harrison reached into the back and pulled out a large wrapped package. The brown paper was tied with simple twine, but there was care in the way it had been packaged. "I thought you might want something clean to wear after your journey," he said, handing it to her. "Mrs. Chen at the dress shop helped me pick it out. I did not know your exact size, but I described your height from your letters, and she seemed confident it would fit near enough." Katherine stared at the package, then at Harrison, then back at the package. Her hands shook as she untied the twine and peeled back the paper. Inside was a dress of soft blue cotton, simple but well made, with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Beneath it was a clean chemise, a petticoat, stockings, and even a pair of sturdy but feminine leather shoes. There was also a brush, a handful of pins, and a bar of lavender soap. "I thought you might want to freshen up before we head to the ranch," Harrison said, and now there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice, as if he worried he had overstepped somehow. "Mrs. Henderson has a room at her boarding house where you can change and rest if you need to. We can wait until tomorrow to leave town if you are too tired for the ride today." The tears Katherine had been fighting broke free, streaming down her dusty cheeks before she could stop them. She clutched the dress to her chest, not caring that she was making a spectacle of herself in the middle of San Diego's Main Street. "You bought me a dress." "I bought you several, actually," Harrison said, looking uncomfortable with her tears. "There are 3 more at the ranch and fabric if you want to make others. I was not sure what you would like, so I told Mrs. Chen to pick things that were practical but pretty." "Was that presumptuous?" "Your letters said you came from a good family back in Boston, and I thought maybe you would be particular about such things." Katherine let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. In his letters, Harrison had seemed kind but reserved, a practical man looking for a practical arrangement. She had expected stern politeness at best, possibly cold indifference. She had not expected this thoughtfulness, this quiet generosity that saw her need and met it without making her feel smaller than she already did. "It was not presumptuous," she managed to say. "It was the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a very long time. Thank you." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, taking Katherine's elbow gently. "Come along, dear. Let me help you get cleaned up. Harrison, you go finish your business at the store and we will meet you back here in an hour." Harrison nodded, his eyes still on Katherine with an expression that might have been concern or might have been something else entirely. "Take all the time you need," he said. "There is no rush, Mrs." Henderson led Katherine down the street to a 2-story building with a neatly painted sign that read, "Henderson's Boarding House." The elderly woman kept up a steady stream of cheerful conversation as they climbed the stairs to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. A wash basin sat on a stand by the window, and the bed was covered with a colorful quilt that showed the skill of an expert hand. "Now then," Mrs. Henderson said, already pouring water from a pitcher into the basin. "Let me help you out of those poor rags, and we will get you properly sorted. Harrison is a good man, you know. One of the best. He has had that ranch for 5 years now, building it up from nothing. Works harder than any 3 men I have ever known, but he has been lonely out there, I think. This town is growing, but it is still small enough that everyone knows everyone else's business, and there are not many unmarried women of good character around. When he told me he had written to a marriage agency back east, I worried some scheming woman would take advantage of his good nature. But your letters, which he showed me, I will admit, sounded genuine. You sounded like a woman who had fallen on hard times but was willing to work for a better future. Katherine stood still as Mrs. Henderson helped her out of the ruined dress, too exhausted and overwhelmed to feel embarrassed. The cool water felt like heaven on her grimy skin as she washed away days of traveled dirt. I was a governess, she heard herself saying, in Boston. The family I worked for lost their fortune in a banking scandal, and they could not pay me the wages they owed. Without references, I could not find another position. I had no family left, no prospects. When I saw the advertisement for the marriage agency, it seemed like the only path forward. And now here you are, Mrs. Henderson said, helping Katherine into the clean chemise. The fabric was soft against her skin, and she could have wept again just from the simple comfort of it. About to marry a good man who had a dress waiting for you, even though he had no idea you would arrive in rags. That tells you something about his character, does it not? It did tell her something. Katherine had been prepared to fulfill her obligation to a stranger, to work hard and earn her place as Harrison O'Brien's wife through domestic competence and quiet cooperation. She had not expected to feel this flutter of hope, this possibility that the arrangement might become something more than a business transaction. The blue dress fit surprisingly well, only slightly loose in the waist. Mrs. Henderson helped her lace it properly and tied the sash at the back into a neat bow. Katherine brushed her hair until it shone, twisted it into a simple bun, and pinned it securely. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized the woman looking back. She still looked tired, with shadows under her green eyes and sunburn on her nose, but she looked human again, presentable. There now, Mrs. Henderson said with satisfaction. Much better. Are you ready to meet your future husband properly? Katherine took a deep breath and nodded. Yes. Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Henderson. Oh, call me Agnes, dear. We are going to be friends, I am sure of it. They returned to the main street where Harrison waited by his wagon, and Katherine watched his face as he turned and saw her. His expression transformed, a slow smile spreading across his features that made him look younger, almost boyish despite his weathered appearance. He had cleaned up as well, she noticed, and his hair was damp as if he had dunked his head in a water trough. The thought made her want to smile. Miss Zimmerman, he said, and there was warmth in his voice that had not been there before. You look lovely. Thanks to your thoughtfulness, she replied. I cannot thank you enough for the dress, Mr. O'Brien. Harrison, he corrected gently, we are to be married after all. Shall we speak to Reverend Thomas today, or would you prefer to wait a few days to rest and settle in? Katherine considered this. Propriety would suggest waiting, getting to know each other at least slightly before binding themselves legally and spiritually. But propriety also demanded a chaperone, and she could not stay at the boarding house indefinitely without causing scandal. More than that, she found she did not want to wait. Harrison had shown her more genuine kindness in 1 hour than she had experienced in the past year. Whatever happened next, she believed he would treat her with decency and respect, which was more than she had dared hope for. Today, if the Reverend is available, she said. I see no reason to delay. Something flickered in Harrison's eyes, pleasure perhaps, or relief. Then let me help you into the wagon, and we will go speak with him now. The Reverend, a thin man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers, agreed to perform the ceremony immediately. Mrs. Henderson and her husband served as witnesses, and the general store owner, a jovial man named Mr. Peterson, closed his shop to attend. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church at the edge of town, with afternoon sunlight streaming through the plain glass windows. Katherine spoke her vows in a clear voice, and when Harrison slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady and warm. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thomas said, and Harrison leaned down to press a chaste, gentle kiss to Katherine's lips. It lasted only a moment, but she felt the warmth of it down to her toes. And just like that, she was Katherine O'Brien, wife of a California rancher, bound to a man she had met only hours before. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt only cautious hope. They thanked the Reverend and the witnesses, and Harrison helped Katherine back into the wagon. The sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As they left the town behind, following a well-worn dirt road that led into the rolling hills beyond, Katherine studied her new husband from the corner of her eye. "How far is the ranch?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "About an hour's ride," Harrison replied. "The land is good there, with a creek that runs year-round and enough grazing for cattle. I have about 200 head right now, and I am building the herd slowly. There are 4 horses, chickens, and a milk cow. The house is not fancy, but it is solid. I built most of it myself, with help from some of the men in town. 2 bedrooms, a main room with a kitchen area, and a porch that faces east to catch the sunrise." He spoke with quiet pride, and Katherine could hear how much the ranch meant to him. "It sounds wonderful. I am good with chickens and gardening, though I confess I have never milked a cow." Harrison's lips quirked in a small smile. "I will teach you. It is not difficult once you get the knack of it. Bessie is patient with beginners. You named your cow Bessie. It seemed to suit her." They lapsed into silence again, but it was not awkward. Katherine watched the landscape roll by, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. The air smelled of sage and dust and growing things. In the distance, she could see mountains rising against the sky, their peaks still touched with snow despite the warmth of the late spring day. The year was 1875, and California was still wild in many ways, still being settled and tamed by people brave or desperate enough to build lives in an unforgiving land. "I want you to know," Harrison said suddenly, his voice careful, "that I expect this marriage to be a true partnership. You are not a servant or a housekeeper I have hired. You are my wife, and your thoughts and opinions matter. If something is not to your liking, or if you need something, I want you to tell me. Can you do that?" Katherine turned to look at him fully. His eyes were on the road ahead, his hands steady on the reins, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, as if her answer mattered greatly to him. "I can do that," she said. "And I want you to know that I intend to be a good wife to you, Harrison. I will work hard and do my best to help you build the life you want here. The life we want," he corrected gently. "This is your home now too, Katherine. Your dreams matter as much as mine." They crested a small rise, and Harrison pulled the wagon to a stop. Below them, nestled in a valley between 2 hills, was the ranch. The house was simple but well built, made of wood with a stone chimney. It had glass windows which surprised her, and the porch Harrison had mentioned did indeed face east. Behind the house was a barn, a chicken coop, a corral with several horses, and fields that had been cleared for crops. A creek glittered in the fading sunlight, lined with cottonwood trees that provided shade. "That is home," Harrison said, and there was vulnerability in his voice, as if he was showing her something precious and waiting to see if she would treasure it or scorn it. "It is beautiful," Katherine said, and she meant it. After the chaos and dirt of her journey, after the fear and uncertainty of the past months, the sight of that sturdy house with smoke curling from its chimney looked like a haven. Truly beautiful. Harrison's shoulders relaxed, and he clicked to the horses, guiding the wagon down the slope toward their new life together. As they drew closer, Katherine could see details she had missed from a distance. The porch had a swing hanging from chains, and there were flower boxes beneath the windows, though they were empty at the moment. The barn door had been painted red, a cheerful splash of color against the weathered wood. Harrison brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, then came around to help Katherine descend. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her down, and he held on for just a moment longer than necessary, as if making sure she was steady. "Welcome home, Katherine," he said softly. The words sent a warmth through her chest that had nothing to do with the California sun. "Thank you for bringing me here, Harrison, for taking a chance on a woman you knew only through letters. I could say the same to you. You traveled across the country to marry a stranger. That took considerable courage, or considerable desperation," Katherine said with a wry smile. "Perhaps both, but you are here now and I am glad of it." He offered her his arm. "Come inside. I have supper ready, or at least I hope it is still edible. I was not sure when you would arrive, so I made a stew this morning and left it warming on the stove." The interior of the house was clean and simply furnished. The main room had a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, shelves lined with books, and a comfortable-looking armchair with a knitted blanket draped over its back. The kitchen area had a cast-iron stove, a dry sink, and cabinets for storing food and dishes. Everything was orderly and well-maintained, which spoke to Harrison's character. "The bedroom on the right is yours," Harrison said, setting her carpetbag down by the doorway. "I sleep in the room on the left. I thought you might appreciate having your own space, at least until we know each other better." Katherine felt relief and something else, perhaps slight disappointment, though she could not quite name why. "That is very considerate of you." "The marriage bed is important," Harrison said, and a flush crept up his neck as he spoke. "But I do not want you to feel pressured or afraid. We have time to build trust between us." He was offering her a gift, she realized, the gift of patience and respect. How many mail-order brides arrived at their new homes only to be claimed immediately by husbands who saw them as property rather than partners? Harrison was giving her the space to adjust, to feel safe, and she loved him a little bit for that, even though love was not part of their arrangement. Or at least, it had not been supposed to be. The stew was surprisingly good, rich with beef and vegetables, seasoned with herbs she could not quite identify. They ate at the table, and Harrison told her about the ranch, about his plans to expand the herd and eventually hire some ranch hands to help with the work. Katherine told him about her life in Boston, about the family she had worked for and the children she had taught. "You must miss them," Harrison said. "The children." "I do," Katherine admitted, "but their parents had to send them to live with relatives in New York when their financial troubles became too severe. I said my goodbyes months before I left Boston." "Perhaps we will have children of our own someday," Harrison said carefully, "if that is something you would want." Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "I would like that, someday." After supper, Harrison showed her the rest of the house. Her bedroom was small but comfortable, with a real bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the valley. On the bed were 3 wrapped packages, the additional dresses Harrison had mentioned. She unwrapped them to find a practical brown dress for daily work, a green dress for Sundays, and a beautiful cream-colored dress with delicate embroidery that took her breath away. "For special occasions," Harrison said from the doorway. Mrs. Chen said every woman needs at least one dress that makes her feel beautiful. Katherine ran her fingers over the embroidery, tracing the delicate flowers stitched into the fabric. Thank you, Harrison, for all of this. You have been more generous than I could have imagined. You left everything behind to come here, he said. The least I could do was make sure you had the essentials to start your new life. Sleep well, Katherine. Tomorrow I will show you around the property properly, and you can decide how you want to arrange things in the house. Make whatever changes you like. This is your home now. He bid her good night and closed the door softly behind him, leaving Katherine alone in her new room. She undressed slowly, hanging the blue dress carefully in the wardrobe, and slipped into the nightgown she found folded in one of the packages. It was soft white cotton, modest but comfortable. As she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home, Katherine thought about the man sleeping in the room across the hallway. Harrison O'Brien was not what she had expected. She had anticipated someone gruff and demanding, someone who saw her as a means to an end. Instead, she had found a man who was thoughtful and kind, who had a dress waiting for her even though he could not have known she would arrive in rags. Perhaps, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, this arrangement might become something more than she had dared to hope for. Perhaps this could become a real marriage, built on respect and affection and, eventually, love. The first rays of sunlight woke Katherine the next morning, streaming through her window just as Harrison had promised. She dressed in the practical brown dress and braided her hair, then ventured out into the main room. Harrison was already awake, standing at the stove with a skillet cooking eggs and bacon. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "I hope you slept well. The bed was comfortable enough, very comfortable, thank you. I slept better than I have in weeks." They ate breakfast together, and then Harrison gave her a proper tour of the property. He showed her the chicken coop, where a dozen hens clucked and scratched at the ground. He introduced her to Bessie, the patient brown cow who stood placidly while Katherine attempted her first milking lesson. He walked her through the garden plot, which had been freshly tilled but not yet planted. "I was waiting for you," he explained. "I thought you might have opinions about what we should grow. I can handle the heavy work of maintaining it, but I figured you would be the one cooking most of the meals, so you should decide what you want to have on hand." Katherine knelt in the rich, dark soil, letting it run through her fingers. "We should plant vegetables first, practical things. Carrots, potatoes, onions, beans, and perhaps some herbs for cooking and medicine. Then maybe some flowers around the house to make it cheerful." "Whatever you want," Harrison said. "I will ride into town tomorrow and get seeds." They spent the morning working side by side, Harrison repairing a section of fence while Katherine explored the house more thoroughly and began planning where she would put things. Around midday, she made sandwiches from the bread and cold meat in the pantry, and they ate on the porch swing, watching the cattle graze in the distance. "Tell me about your family," Katherine said. "Your letters mentioned you came from Missouri originally." Harrison was quiet for a moment, and she wondered if she had overstepped. But then he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "I grew up on a farm outside St. Louis. My father was a hard man, not cruel exactly, but not affectionate either. He expected me to take over the farm, but I wanted something different. I wanted to build something that was mine, not just inherit something that would always be his, even after he died. So I left when I was 20, worked my way west doing whatever jobs I could find, and saved every penny until I had enough to buy this land. That was 5 years ago, and I have been building the ranch ever since. You miss your family, sometimes. My mother passed when I was 16, and my father died 2 years after I left. I have a sister in Missouri, married with children of her own. We write occasionally, but we were never close. Katherine understood loneliness, the kind that came from being surrounded by people but still feeling fundamentally alone. She reached over and squeezed Harrison's hand, a simple gesture of comfort and connection. He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, and something warm and tender passed between them. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a comfortable rhythm. Katherine took over the cooking and the care of the chickens, and she spent hours in the garden, planting seeds and coaxing them to grow. Harrison worked on the ranch, mending fences and tending the cattle, and in the evenings they would sit together and talk. Sometimes they read aloud to each other from the books on his shelves. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, watching the sun set over the valley. Katherine found herself watching Harrison when he was not looking, admiring the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt as he worked, the concentration on his face when he was fixing something, the gentleness in his hands when he helped her with a difficult task. She caught him watching her sometimes too, and the heat in his gaze made her breath catch. One evening, about a month after her arrival, they were sitting on the porch after supper when Harrison reached over and took her hand. "Katherine, I want to ask you something, and I want you to feel free to say no if you are not ready." Her heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "I would like to court you properly," he said, and there was vulnerability in his expression. "I know we are already married, which makes it a bit backwards, but I want you to know that my feelings for you go beyond simple partnership. I have come to care for you deeply, and I would like the chance to win your affection, if I have not done so already." Katherine felt joy bloom in her chest like the flowers beginning to grow in her garden. "You have won my affection, Harrison. I care for you too, more than I thought possible when I arrived here." Harrison's smile was radiant. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, then her wrist, then the inside of her palm. The gesture was tender and intimate, and Katherine felt heat pool low in her belly. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Properly this time, not just a peck for the reverend." "Yes," she whispered, and he leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind. His lips were warm and firm against hers, moving with a gentleness that made her melt. Katherine had been kissed before, hurried stolen kisses in her youth that had taught her nothing about real desire. This was different. This was Harrison pouring everything he felt into the connection between them, showing her with his lips and his hands which cupped her face so carefully that she was precious to him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I want you to know that you can set the pace for everything between us. I will follow your lead, Katherine. I want you in my bed, in my arms, but only when you are ready." "I am ready," Katherine said, surprised by her own boldness. "I want to be your wife in truth, Harrison. I want to share your bed and your life in every way." He stood and offered her his hand, and she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They walked inside together, and Harrison led her to his bedroom, which she had not entered since arriving at the ranch. It was similar to hers, but slightly larger, with a bigger bed and a handmade quilt in shades of blue and brown. Harrison lit the lamp on the bedside table, casting the room in soft golden light. Then he turned to Katherine and began to undo the buttons of her dress with slow, careful fingers. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he murmured. "At any point, just say the word." But Katherine did not want him to stop. She helped him with the buttons, and soon her dress pooled at her feet. Harrison removed her petticoats and corset, his breath catching when she stood before him in just her chemise. "You are so beautiful," he said reverently. "I thought so from the first moment I saw you, even covered in dust and wearing rags." Katherine reached for the buttons of his shirt, fumbling slightly in her nervousness. Harrison helped her, shrugging out of the shirt and then removing his trousers until he stood before her in just his undergarments. His body was muscled and scarred, marked by years of hard work, and Katherine thought he was the most magnificent thing she had ever seen. He pulled back the covers and guided her onto the bed, then stretched out beside her, propped on one elbow so he could look down at her. "I will try to be gentle," he said, "but if I hurt you, you must tell me." "I trust you," Katherine said, and she realized it was true. She trusted this man completely with her body and her heart. What followed was tender and intimate, awkward in moments as they learned each other, but ultimately beautiful. Harrison was patient and attentive, making sure Katherine found pleasure even as he claimed his own. When it was over, he held her close, his hand stroking her hair, and Katherine felt complete in a way she never had before. "I love you," Harrison whispered into the darkness. "I know it is soon, and perhaps I should not say it yet, but I do. I love you, Katherine." "I love you too," she replied, and the words felt right, felt true. "I think I started loving you the moment you gave me that dress," he chuckled softly. "Then I am glad Mrs. Chen has such good taste." They fell asleep tangled together, and from that night on, Katherine slept in Harrison's bed, in Harrison's arms, where she belonged. The seasons changed, summer giving way to fall and then winter. The ranch prospered, and so did their marriage. They worked side by side every day, building their life together one small moment at a time. Harrison taught Katherine to ride, and she taught him to make bread that did not come out hard as a rock. They laughed together and occasionally argued, but they always made up, always came back to each other with open hearts. In the spring of 1876, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She told Harrison one evening while they were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. He was silent for a long moment, and she worried that perhaps he was not ready, that she should have waited longer. But then he swept her up into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests, his face alight with joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine suffered from sickness in the early months, and Harrison fretted over her constantly, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a plate. But as her belly swelled with their child, she had never felt more content. This was what she had dreamed of, not even knowing she had dreamed it. A home, a husband who loved her, a child growing inside her. Their son was born in December, a week before Christmas, during a brief winter storm that left the valley covered in a rare dusting of snow. Mrs. Henderson came to help with the birth, along with a midwife from town, and Harrison wore a path in the floorboards of the main room with his pacing. When Katherine finally held their son in her arms, she wept with joy. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Harrison came into the bedroom, his face pale with worry, and stopped when he saw Katherine sitting up in bed, tired but radiant, cradling their child. "You did it," he said hoarsely, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Are you all right? Is he all right?" "We are both fine," Katherine assured him. "Come meet your son." Harrison took the baby with shaking hands, holding him as if he were made of glass. The tough rancher who could wrestle a steer and build a house with his bare hands was terrified of the tiny infant in his arms. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father, and I promise I will do everything in my power to give you a good life." They named him Henry O'Brien, and he became the center of their world. Harrison proved to be a devoted father, waking in the night to walk with Henry when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply staring at his son in wonder. As Henry grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch continued to expand. Harrison hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increasing workload, good men who treated Katherine with respect and worked hard for fair wages. The cattle herd grew to 500 head, and they added sheep as well, which Katherine enjoyed tending. Her garden flourished, and she began selling her excess produce in town, using the money to buy books and toys for Henry. In the fall of 1878, Katherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Hope. She had Katherine's auburn hair and a sunny disposition that made everyone who met her smile. Henry, now almost 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, from feeding to diaper changes. Life was full and rich and sometimes exhausting, but Katherine had never been happier. She would think back sometimes to the woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in rags, terrified and ashamed, not knowing what the future held. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. One evening in the spring of 1880, Katherine and Harrison sat on their porch swing, watching Henry chase fireflies in the growing dusk while Hope slept peacefully in her cradle nearby. They had been married for 5 years, and Katherine still felt a flutter in her chest when Harrison smiled at her. "You remember when you first arrived?" Harrison asked, his arm around her shoulders. "You were so thin and tired, wearing those rags looking like you might collapse at any moment. I remember thinking you would take one look at me and change your mind about the whole arrangement," Katherine said. "I looked like a disaster." "You looked like someone who had been through hell but had not let it break her," Harrison corrected. "You held your head high, even though I could see you were terrified. That took strength. And I remember thinking that if you had that much strength, you would be the perfect partner for building a life out here. And then you gave me the dress," Katherine said softly. "You have no idea what that meant to me, Harrison. It was not just a dress. It was dignity. It was kindness when I expected judgment. It was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, I had made the right choice coming here." Harrison pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best decision I ever made, writing to that marriage agency. I found the other half of my soul in those letters, and then you arrived, and you were even better than I had imagined." "I love you," Katherine said, turning to kiss him properly. "I love the life we have built together. I love our children. I love waking up next to you every morning. I love everything about this life, even the hard parts." "I love you too," Harrison replied. "And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that stagecoach ride west." Henry came running up to the porch, his small hands cupped carefully. "Mama, Papa, look, I caught a firefly." They admired his catch and then convinced him to let it go, watching it fly away into the gathering darkness, its light blinking like a tiny star. Hope woke and began to fuss, and Katherine lifted her from the cradle, settling her on her hip. Harrison pulled Henry up into his lap, and they sat together as a family, watching the night fall over the valley. The ranch continued to thrive over the following years. By 1885, they had nearly 1,000 head of cattle and had purchased additional land to accommodate the growing herd. They built a larger barn and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, which now numbered 5. The original house was expanded, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor, though Katherine insisted on keeping the porch swing where they had spent so many evenings together. Henry grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved reading as much as he loved working with the animals. Hope was bright and fearless, constantly getting into mischief and making everyone laugh. In 1881, they had another son, Thomas, who was quiet and observant, content to spend hours watching the world around him. And in 1884, another daughter arrived, Ruth, who had Harrison's blue eyes and her mother's determination. Katherine had become a pillar of the community, organizing fundraisers for the church, teaching the children in town to read when they did not have a school teacher, and helping new families settle in the area. When another mail-order bride arrived in circumstances similar to Catherine's own, it was Katherine who made sure the woman had dresses and supplies, remembering all too well what it felt like to arrive with nothing. Harrison was respected as a fair rancher who paid his workers well and treated them with dignity. He served on the town council and helped settle disputes between neighbors. Together, he and Katherine had built not just a successful ranch but a legacy. One day in the summer of 1890, Katherine was working in her garden when a fancy carriage rolled up to the house. A well-dressed woman stepped out, followed by a man in an expensive suit. Katherine straightened, wiping her hands on her apron, wondering who these visitors could be. "Mrs. O'Brien?" the woman asked. She was middle-aged with carefully styled gray hair and an air of wealth about her. "Katherine O'Brien." "Yes, I am Katherine O'Brien. How may I help you?" The woman smiled, though there was sadness in her eyes. "You may not remember me. I am Eleanor Hastings from Boston. You were governess to my children, James and Sarah, before we had to let you go." Katherine's breath caught. She remembered the Hastings family well, remembered the children she had taught and loved, remembered the pain of saying goodbye when their world had fallen apart. "Mrs. Hastings." "Of course I remember. Please, come inside. Let me get you something cool to drink. It is a warm day." They settled in the parlor, and Eleanor looked around at the comfortable room with its handmade furniture and family photographs on the walls. "You have done well for yourself, Katherine." "I am so glad. I felt terrible when we had to let you go without proper references or wages. It has haunted me all these years." "Please do not trouble yourself," Katherine said gently. "That time led me here, to my husband and children, to this life. I have no regrets." "You are kind to say so," Eleanor said. "But I want to make amends. My husband and we recovered our fortune through careful investments and a good deal of luck. We are wealthy again, perhaps more so than before, and we want to repay the wages we owed you with interest. It is the least we can do." She held out an envelope, thick with bills. Katherine stared at it, then shook her head. "I cannot accept that, Mrs. Hastings. Truly, there is no need." "Please," Eleanor insisted. "I will feel better knowing I have settled this debt. Use it for your children's education or save it for the future. But please take it. You earned it and more besides." Katherine finally accepted the envelope, not because she needed the money, but because she could see that Eleanor needed the absolution. "Thank you. That is very generous. How are James and Sarah?" Eleanor's face lit up. "They are well. James is at university, studying law, and Sarah is engaged to be married. They both speak of you fondly and often. I told them I was making this trip, and they sent letters." She pulled 2 envelopes from her bag. "They wanted you to know that you made a difference in their lives, that they remember your kindness." Katherine accepted the letters with trembling hands, tears pricking her eyes. That evening, after Eleanor and her husband had left, continuing on their journey to San Francisco, Katherine sat with Harrison on the porch and read the letters aloud. James wrote about how her patience in teaching him mathematics had inspired his love of logic and law. Sarah wrote about how Katherine's example of grace under difficult circumstances had shaped the woman she was becoming. "You touched their lives," Harrison said softly, "just as you have touched mine and our children's and so many others in this town. You are an extraordinary woman, Katherine O'Brien." "I am just a woman who was given a second chance," Katherine replied. "A woman who stepped off a stagecoach in rags and found a man waiting with a dress and an open heart." Harrison pulled her close, and they sat together in the growing twilight, surrounded by the life they had built from nothing but hope and hard work and love. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Henry went to university in San Francisco, studying veterinary medicine so he could return and help modernize the ranch's animal care. Hope married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who treated her like a queen. Thomas took over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, showing a natural talent for business and management. Ruth became a teacher, working in the new school that had been built in San Diego. Katherine and Harrison grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and the life they had built together. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1905, their children threw them a party at the ranch. The house and grounds were filled with friends and neighbors, with music and laughter and an abundance of food. Katherine wore the cream-colored dress Harrison had given her all those years ago, carefully preserved and still beautiful. Harrison wore his best suit, though he complained that it was too tight around the middle. As the sun began to set, casting the valley in golden light, Henry called for everyone's attention. "I want to propose a toast," he said, raising his glass. "To my parents, Harrison and Katherine O'Brien, who have shown us all what true love looks like. They built this ranch from nothing, raised 4 children who adore them and have been pillars of this community for 30 years. Papa, you are the hardest working man I know, and the kindest. Mama, you are the strongest woman I have ever met, and your grace and compassion have shaped all of our lives. Thank you for showing us what a real marriage should be. To 30 more years. To 30 more years," the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Katherine and Harrison stood together, his arm around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder, and looked out at the life they had created. 4 children, grown and happy. 10 grandchildren, running around the yard playing games. A ranch that had become one of the most successful in the region. A community of friends who had become family. "You ever think about that day I arrived?" Katherine asked softly, so only Harrison could hear. "About the woman in rags who was so afraid of what the future would hold." "I think about it often," Harrison replied. "And I thank God every day that you had the courage to step off that stagecoach, that you gave me a chance to love you." "The dress helped," Katherine said with a smile. "That beautiful blue dress waiting for me. It was the first sign that I was going to be all right, that this stranger I had traveled across the country to marry might actually be a good man." Harrison laughed. "I was so nervous that morning, going to the dress shop, trying to describe you to Mrs. Chen. I wanted everything to be perfect, wanted you to feel welcome. I had no idea you would arrive in such a state, but I am glad the dress was there when you needed it." "It was not just about the dress," Katherine said, turning to look up at him. "It was about what the dress represented. Thoughtfulness, kindness. A man who saw me not as a commodity but as a person deserving of dignity and respect. That is what I fell in love with, Harrison, your good heart." "And I fell in love with your strength," Harrison replied. "Your determination to build a new life, your grace under pressure, your open heart. You made this house a home. You made me whole." They kissed, there in front of their children and grandchildren and friends, a long, sweet kiss that spoke of 30 years of love and partnership and devotion. When they pulled apart, there was not a dry eye among the assembled guests. As the party wound down and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Katherine and Harrison retreated to their porch swing, the same one they had sat on countless evenings over the past 3 decades. The party continued around them, their children making sure the guests were fed and entertained, but they took a moment for themselves to remember and reflect. "I have been so blessed," Katherine said quietly. "I had nothing when I arrived here. No money, no prospects, no family. Just a letter from a stranger and a prayer that I was making the right choice. And look at what we have built. Look at this family, this life. We built it together, Harrison said. Every day choosing each other, working side by side. That is what made it possible. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the music and laughter floating from the yard, feeling the cool evening breeze, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast California sky. This was their legacy, not just the land or the cattle or the house, but the love they had nurtured, the family they had raised, the community they had helped build. I would do it all again, Katherine said. Every difficult moment, every challenge, every hardship. Because it led me here, to you, to this life. I would step off that stagecoach in rags 1,000 times if it meant finding you at the end of the journey. And I would be waiting, Harrison replied, with a dress and an open heart, ready to build a life with the bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. They were silent for a long moment, both lost in memory and gratitude. Then Katherine spoke again, her voice soft but clear. Do you remember what you said to me that first night? That you wanted our marriage to be a true partnership, that my thoughts and opinions mattered. I remember, Harrison said, and I have tried every day to honor that promise. You have, Katherine assured him. You have treated me as an equal in all things. You have valued my input and respected my decisions. You have been not just my husband, but my partner, my best friend, my great love. Thank you for that, Harrison. Thank you for seeing me as a person, not just a role to be filled. Harrison pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher with more dreams than sense. Thank you for building this life with me, for giving me children and a home and more happiness than I knew was possible. You are everything to me, Katherine. Everything. The party continued late into the night, but eventually the guests departed, and their children said their goodbyes, and Katherine and Harrison were left alone in the house that had been the center of their lives for 30 years. They prepared for bed with the comfortable ease of long habit, and as they lay together in the darkness, Katherine felt overwhelming gratitude for the path her life had taken. She had arrived in California expecting nothing, hoping only for survival and perhaps a measure of security. Instead, she had found love, real and deep and lasting. She had found a home, not just a house, but a place where she belonged, where she was valued, where she was cherished. She had found a family, children and grandchildren who would carry forward the legacy of love and hard work that she and Harrison had established. As she drifted off to sleep, safe in Harrison's arms, Katherine thought one last time about that blue dress, waiting for her all those years ago. It had been a symbol then, and it remained a symbol now, of a love that had been waiting for her, patient and ready, needing only her arrival to bloom into something beautiful and lasting. The rancher had a dress waiting, but more than that, he had a heart waiting, open and ready to love her. And she had arrived in rags but left them behind, stepping into a new life, a new identity, a new love that would sustain her for all her days. The end of the story came many years later, in 1920, when Katherine and Harrison celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. They were old now, their bodies worn by time and work, but their love remained as strong as ever. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other goodnight, still sat together on the porch swing and watched the sun set over the valley they had called home for so long. Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1922, with Katherine holding his hand. She grieved deeply, but not without hope, knowing they would be reunited one day. She lived another 3 years, surrounded by the family they had created, telling stories of the early days, of arriving in rags and finding a dress waiting, of building a life from nothing but love and determination. When Katherine passed away in 1925, she was laid to rest beside Harrison on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky as vast and blue as the one that had welcomed her to California 50 years before. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, and as they stood together, they knew they were part of something rare and precious, a love story that had started with a dress and a prayer, and had grown into a legacy that would endure for generations. The ranch continued to operate, passed down through the family, and the story of Katherine and Harrison became legend in the community. People spoke of the mail-order bride who arrived in rags, and the rancher who had a dress waiting, of how their love had built not just a successful ranch, but a family rooted in respect and partnership and devotion. And somewhere, perhaps in whatever comes after this life, Katherine and Harrison found each other again, young and strong and whole, ready to begin another adventure together, with all of eternity stretching before them and love as their constant companion. The blue dress, carefully preserved, was passed down through the generations, a tangible reminder of where it all began, of the moment when a desperate woman and a hopeful man took a chance on each other and created something beautiful that would last far beyond their own lives. It hung in a place of honor in the ranch house, and each generation heard the story, learned the lesson, understood that love is not just a feeling but a choice, made every day in big gestures and small, in dresses given and received, in hands held and lives shared. And that, truly, was the end and the beginning, the alpha and omega of a love story that started with rags and a dress, and became something eternal,